When the Australian government released its updated National Defence Strategy in 2026, it confirmed a figure that sent shockwaves through the global financial markets, the halls of the Pentagon, and the strategic planning rooms of Beijing. $425 billion. $425 billion. This is the revised, inflation-adjusted, hyper-realistic total life-cycle cost of the AUKUS nuclear-powered submarine program. To comprehend that number, you have to discard your normal understanding of military spending. That is not the cost of an aircraft carrier. That is not the cost of a fleet of fighter jets. That is an amount of capital greater than the entire gross domestic product of countries like New Zealand, Finland, or South Africa. It is a sum that rivals the Apollo space program and the Manhattan Project combined, adjusted for the relative size of the Australian economy. When a nation of just 26 million people decides to dedicate $425 billion to a singular weapon system, they are no longer just buying a piece of military hardware. They are executing a total, uncompromising macroeconomic mobilization. They are fundamentally rewiring the DNA of their entire national economy. For the average Australian citizen, this number represents a terrifying unknown. It represents decades of potential tax increases, frozen social spending, and the total diversion of national resources away from infrastructure and health, and into the dark, silent depths of the ocean. But for the strategic planners in Canberra, Washington, and London, this number represents something far more profound. It represents the brutal, unsentimental mathematics of survival in the 21st century. The Western Alliance has realized that you cannot fight a hyper-industrialized, mass-producing superpower like the Chinese Communist Party using the spare change found in the couch cushions of the national budget. You cannot deter the largest naval expansion in human history with a peacetime dividend. To win the Pacific, you have to put your entire sovereign balance sheet on the table. You have to push all of your chips into the center. The $425 billion AUKUS program is not an arms purchase. It is a declaration of macroeconomic warfare. And the Australian continent has just gone all in. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are pulling back the curtain on the most complex, dangerous, and controversial financial gamble in the history of the Western Alliance. Here is the thesis for this episode. War is not won on the battlefield, it is won on the balance sheet. The nation that can sustain the deepest, most agonizing financial attrition is the nation that commands the ocean. Australia has recognized that its geographic isolation is no longer enough to protect it. To survive the coming storm, it must build the nuclear forge of the Southern Hemisphere, regardless of the domestic cost. If you are beginning to understand why the true metrics of global power are not decided by the words of politicians, but by the relentless, terrifying allocation of sovereign capital, heavy industrial infrastructure, and raw economic sacrifice, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We strip away the media spin to bring you the cold, kinetic realities of how the free world actually finances its survival. Your support ensures we can keep delivering this level of uncompromising strategic analysis. For the last 5 years, the narrative surrounding AUKUS has been heavily focused on the technology. We have obsessed over pressurized water reactors, acoustic stealth tiles, and Tomahawk cruise missiles. But technology is just the tip of the spear. The shaft of the spear is money. And the shaft is currently splintering the Australian defence establishment. We are going to break down the capital squeeze, how the staggering cost of the nuclear navy is actively, aggressively cannibalizing the Australian Army, forcing a ruthless prioritization of sea power over land power. We are going to analyze the sovereign supply chain, why Australia is handing hundreds of millions of dollars directly to British and American factories to buy the blueprints for its own industrial revolution. And we will explore the Valley of Death, the terrifying financial and operational trap waiting in the 2030s, where Australia must bleed cash to survive a decade without a new submarine in the water. Let us begin by confronting the brutal reality of the defense budget, and the absolute havoc that $425 billion is wreaking on the rest of the Australian military. The myth of the infinite budget. To understand the internal civil war currently raging within the Russell offices, the headquarters of the Australian Defence Force in Canberra, you must first understand the concept of opportunity cost. In the realm of defense economics, there is no such thing as an infinite budget. Every single dollar allocated to a nuclear reactor is a dollar that cannot be spent on an infantryman, a tank, or an artillery shell. When the Australian government committed to the SS and AUKUS program, they committed to an expenditure that would fundamentally warp the gravitational pull of the entire national budget. The 2026 National Defence Strategy officially codified this reality. To fund AUKUS, the Australian defence budget is being aggressively pushed upwards, surging toward the historic threshold of 3% of gross domestic product, GDP. For a nation that spent the majority of the post-Cold War era hovering around 1.5% to 2%, this is a seismic shift. It represents tens of billions of new dollars flowing into the Department of Defense. But even with this massive influx of fresh capital, the staggering $425 billion life cycle cost of the nuclear submarines creates a black hole that threatens to swallow everything else. The Royal Australian Navy is not just getting a bigger slice of the pie, it is eating the entire bakery. And the branch of the military that is being served up on the platter is the Australian Army. They are constructing massive 400-meter-long fabrication halls. They are building classified radiological control facilities. They are dredging deep water channels. But most importantly, they are building human capital. You cannot build a nuclear submarine with a workforce of baristas and app developers. The $425 billion pays for the total restructuring of the Australian education and trade system. It funds thousands of scholarships for nuclear physicists, metallurgists, and systems engineers. It pays for master welders to be trained to the microscopic, unforgiving tolerances required to join HY80 high-yield steel pressure hulls. Australia is ensuring that the steel is forged in Australia. The pumps, the valves, the non-nuclear components, and the acoustic tiles will be manufactured by small and medium enterprises, SMEs, spread across New South Wales, Victoria, and Western Australia. The $425 billion is not leaving the country. It is being recycled into the domestic economy to create a hyper-advanced, highly skilled, and technologically supreme workforce. When the AUKUS program is complete, Australia will not just possess a fleet of nuclear submarines. It will possess a sovereign industrial base capable of sustaining, repairing, and innovating upon the most complex machines ever designed by mankind. We are paying a premium to ensure that we are never dependent on the charity of an ally for our survival. We are building the fortress ourselves. The chronological nightmare. The strategy of buying the blueprint and building the nuclear forge is brilliant on paper. But grand strategy must eventually collide with the relentless, unyielding arrow of time. And time is the one thing that $425 billion cannot buy. This brings us to the most terrifying, high-risk aspect of the entire AUKUS macroeconomic gamble. It is an operational and financial gap that strategic planners refer to as the Valley of Death. Let us look at the chronological timeline of the Australian submarine fleet. The current backbone of the undersea deterrent is the Collins-class conventional diesel-electric submarine. These boats were designed in the late 1980s and built in the 1990s. They are magnificent, highly capable hunters, but they are old. They are reaching the absolute outer limits of their structural and operational lifespans. The ultimate prize, the Australian-built SS and AUKUS nuclear submarines, will not begin sliding into the waters of South Australia until the early to mid-2040s. That leaves a terrifying gap of nearly 15 to 20 years. This is the 2030s. This is the Valley of Death. During this decade, the Australian Treasury is going to hemorrhage cash at a rate that defies comprehension, while simultaneously experiencing maximum military vulnerability. The life of type extension, LOT, bleed. To ensure that Australia actually has submarines in the water during the 2030s to train the crews and maintain an undersea deterrence, the government is forced to execute a massive, multi-billion-dollar life of type extension, LOT, on the aging Collins-class fleet. This is not a simple tune-up. A LOT involves bringing a 30-year-old submarine into a dry dock, literally cutting the massive steel pressure hull in half, ripping out the massive multi-ton diesel generators and main electric motors, installing entirely new propulsion and combat systems, and welding the hull back together with absolute millimeter precision. It is an incredibly complex, high-risk, and astronomically expensive engineering procedure. The cost of the Collins LOT program is projected to run into the billions of dollars. Here is the macroeconomic trap. Australia has to spend billions of dollars on a stopgap measure, the Collins LOT, just to keep a 1990s-era conventional submarine afloat, at the exact same time that it is spending tens of billions of dollars building the massive shipyards and infrastructure for the future nuclear fleet. The capital is burning at both ends of the candle. The stopgap mirage and inflationary hell. The AUKUS agreement included a bridge over this valley of death. Under Pillar 1, the United States agreed to sell 3 and potentially up to 5 active-duty Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines to Australia in the early 2030s. This was supposed to be the safety net. But as we have explored in depth on this channel, the American submarine industrial base is currently suffocating under a massive backlog of orders, facing a cumulative delay of over 400 months in its own Virginia-class program. If the American shipyards cannot produce enough submarines to satisfy the requirements of the U.S. Navy, the political reality in Washington, D.C. could shift violently. What happens if, in 2032, the U.S. Congress decides that the threat from China is too severe, and the U.S. Navy is too small, and they officially block the sale of the Virginia-class submarines to Australia? If that happens, Australia is plunged directly into the abyss of the Valley of Death. We would have spent billions on the Collins Lote, bled billions into the AUKUS infrastructure, and handed billions to American and British shipyards, only to arrive in the most dangerous decade of the 21st century with an aging, obsolete conventional fleet and no nuclear stopgap. Furthermore, this entire macroeconomic gamble is highly exposed to the devastating effects of inflation. The $425 billion estimate is based on the economic conditions of the mid-2020s. If global inflation surges, if the cost of high-yield steel skyrockets due to a global conflict, or if the wage demands of highly specialized nuclear engineers explode, that $425 billion price tag could easily balloon to $500 billion, or $600 billion. The Australian economy would be forced to absorb massive compounding cost overruns, forcing even deeper, more agonizing cuts to the rest of the military, the healthcare system, and national infrastructure. The 2030s are not just a waiting period for Australia. They are a high-stakes, terrifying race against inflation, supply chain collapses, and the rapidly expanding capabilities of the Chinese Navy. We are attempting to build the most complex machine in human history while running on a tightrope over a geopolitical volcano. The ultimate test of democratic resolve. The $425 billion AUKUS program is the ultimate test of Western democratic resolve. Authoritarian regimes like the Chinese Communist Party have a distinct, undeniable advantage in macroeconomic warfare. Because they operate a command economy, they can easily suppress domestic wages, ignore environmental regulations, and forcibly direct trillions of dollars into naval shipbuilding and missile production without ever having to worry about losing an election or facing a public backlash over the cost of living. Democracies do not have that luxury. In a democracy, spending $425 billion on a weapon system requires the sustained, unwavering consent of the population over a period of 30 years. It requires multiple changes of government across different political parties to consistently agree that the threat in the Pacific is worth the agonizing financial sacrifice at home. When Beijing looks at the staggering price tag of the Australian nuclear submarine program, they are not just evaluating the lethality of the weapon. They are evaluating the political endurance of the Australian taxpayer. They are betting that eventually the cost will become too high. They are betting that inflation, internal political division, and the sheer, exhausting scale of the megaproject will cause the Australian public to demand a cancellation of the program. They are hoping that the free world will bankrupt itself or simply lose its nerve. The price of survival. But the reality of the 2026 National Defense Strategy is a brutal repudiation of that authoritarian hope. By officially committing to the $425 billion figure, and by executing the ruthless, painful cuts to the Australian Army to fund it, the Australian government has signaled that it understands the stakes. They understand that the cost of AUKUS is astronomically high, but the cost of failure is absolute. If the deterrence fails, and China successfully establishes hegemony over the Indo-Pacific, the economic devastation inflicted upon Australia by a severed supply chain and a maritime blockade would make $425 billion look like a rounding error. The cost of living in a world dictated by Beijing is far higher than the cost of building a nuclear submarine. The balance sheet war is raging right now. It is a war of attrition fought in the Treasury departments and the shipyards of the Western Alliance. Australia is betting its entire sovereign economy on the conviction that a small, highly industrialized, resolute democracy can forge an apex predator capable of holding a superpower at risk. We are buying the blueprint, we are building the forge, and we are paying the price. The $425 billion is not just a budget item. It is the down payment on the survival of the free world in the Southern Hemisphere. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you believe that sacrificing the capabilities of the Australian Army and spending $425 billion on submarines is the right strategic choice? Or is Australia making a catastrophic economic mistake? Let us know your tactical assessment in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay resolute, and we'll see you in the next one.